And we are live. My name's Emma Last and my company is Progressive Minds. I am a mental health performance coach, and the lovely lady with me is the lovely Claire Stevenson. Claire, do you want to just share what you do?
So I am a copy coach. So basically, I teach people how to do their marketing better on social media, teach them how to connect with their ideal client and create a message that attracts their clients and ultimately makes more money.
Fabulous. So we're here today to talk about mental health because tomorrow, Saturday the 10th, is World Mental Health Day. And so I thought, how great would it be if we could do a story series just to raise awareness and to help to get people talking. So I put a post out and asked, so myself and Claire are in a few groups together, and Claire said that she would share her story. So we'll crack on with that, shall we? So, Claire, what's your story in relation to mental health?
It probably started back in childhood. I was as a child of dysfunctional parents, and both parents were narcissists. So kind of developed a bit of an anxiety disorder then. Pushed through it, went to university. And then when I had my first son, I had quite debilitating postnatal depression.
Yeah.
And looking back, I don't actually really remember much about the first year of his life.
Yeah.
And having had 2 children since then, that makes me feel quite sad.
Yeah.
So I had another baby, had a little girl 8 years later, and I had quite severe postnatal depression with her. I think when she was 6 months old, I that was my one and only suicide attempt.
Yeah.
And wasn't really very well supported. I had a partner who wasn't really equipped to provide support. Didn't have a family network around me. Had very, very close friends who were like a second family and really supportive. But have, kind of, you pick up things from those instances, from those things that happen to you, and they become weapons that you use against yourself. It's kind of like when I look back at things that happened when my first 2 were small, and I feel terrible about myself. I feel terrible about how I parented them, decisions I made when I was just clinging on and barely coping. So I think, you can recover from postnatal depression, but I don't think, sometimes the potential is there that it becomes weaponized and something that you have to carry around with you for quite a long time. So I had, I don't think it's something, I don't think it's something that goes away for everybody. It's something that it rears its head for me every now and then. I have helpful, thought patterns and kind of stuff that I'm trying to break those patterns. But it's been a long, it's been, what is it, like 20 years I've been living with it.
Yeah. And is that, do you go through would you say you go through kind of cycles, or does that, are you generally would you say you're kind of in more of a recovery state and it's more just those perhaps unhelpful thought patterns now?
I would say that I'm in a recovery state. I would say that there was a cycle for a long, long time, ups and downs. And it was, it was a case of, and I know lots of people do this with medication. They start taking medication. They think, oh, I feel great now. I'm coping and I'm going to come off the medication because I'm doing really well and I don't need it. And then you come off and perhaps you nosedive, and then you feel again like, oh shit, I failed. I've got to go back on the medication. And you get, you lock yourself into that cycle when there's no need for it.
Yeah.
It's kind of this, you wouldn't feel that way about having a cast on a broken arm.
No, you wouldn't. And this is it's often the conversation I have with people is like, you can't expect to almost recover tomorrow. Give yourself a chance, because ultimately you've got, if you think about that phase that you go through when you break a leg, you go to hospital, it's put in a cast, it's x-rayed, it's put in a cast, and then actually when you that kind of, how long is it, 6-8 weeks, whatever, you might start saying you'll be feeling better within that period of time, if you started taking medication, for example. But actually after that, that's when the real kind of hard work really starts, because it's really the rehabilitation, isn't it? After that, it's like kind of you're building up your muscles again. And I think that's what's really, really important sometimes with mental health, is that, there's this kind of image of, I'm not going to go and reach out for help because I don't want to take medication. Or if I do take medication, that's just the solution. That's all they give me. And actually there's a lot, medication can help you kind of get to a certain point, but it's everything else, the other stuff that you do around that actually helps you change your life in reality.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say that for me, medication has been, it's been like a, it's been like a pair of crutches, it's helped me when I've needed them, it's helped me get about. And I think about the way people talk about medication. I'm not saying that I think medication is the answer to everyone. I would say that for those people who it does help, I wouldn't want them to feel stigmatized by it. And I wouldn't want them to feel like it was a weakness, or that, they weren't, oh God, I've got to go on tablets, or I can't cope without tablets. Because you wouldn't say to somebody, oh God, can't manage your epilepsy, or, you've got to take medication, or, that having to take insulin for, for diabetes was a weakness. I think it's, it's an illness. And if you can manage it and you can take medication and it improves your quality of life, why wouldn't you? Because everybody deserves to be happy, and everybody deserves to have a good quality of life, and they are just a tool.
Yeah.
So I've gone on a bit of a medication rant there.
Oh yeah. It's interesting. Someone messaged me yesterday on one of them as well.
I think it's one of those things that people are really embarrassed to talk about, that they might be on, or that they've been taking it for a long time. And I think, do you know what? If it keeps you safe and it keeps you alive and it gives you a good quality of life, why would you be embarrassed about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, in terms of other things that you do now to kind of help yourself that are, that are perhaps different to, your medication, or the things that kind of you've done in your life that have changed?
Yeah. So I used to be a smoker and a drinker, and those were my kind of things that I would do. But when I kind of realized that actually they're just adding to, to poor health, I took up running. And then I just, for me, it was, it's the adrenaline, it's the endorphins, it's the physical fitness, the feeling of achievement. And I ran, I turned into Forrest Gump, and I did 5 marathons over 10 years.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing.
So so I did a lot of running, a lot of challenges, a lot of mountain climbing. And I find that being outdoors is really, one of the things that I get the most joy from. And also I had a lot of counselling. I think counselling is a lot like finding a driving instructor. You might not fit with the first one. And I think if you go and you speak to someone and you don't feel like you've got that rapport, it's okay to say we're not clicking. And fine, because otherwise you're not going to get the most out of it. So, I found someone who was really, really amazing. And I would say, if I was going to be really honest, that the work we did together probably saved my life.
Yeah.
So, because it's one of, it's one of the things that you never think is going to happen to you.
Yeah.
And on my third baby, I got perinatal depression. And I was like, what? How can I be depressed before this baby is even here? And I was really thrilled to be pregnant, and it was planned, and, everything in my life was great. And then all of a sudden, this massive rush of hormones, and I just felt so low and felt so desperate. And I felt really ashamed to tell people I'm pregnant and I'm depressed when I knew how lucky I was.
Yeah.
And it was really funny. I went to the GP and I was talking to the GP, and she was like, yeah, she said, I understand why you'd be worried about talking about it. You'd probably be afraid we'd take the baby off you. And I was like, no, that did not enter my mind at all. But
until now.
And I just thought, God, and that just for me in that moment highlighted the massive need for training, even in, health authorities and those frontline staff, because I thought that wasn't what I was struggling with. And I felt like it was a hugely inappropriate thing to say.
Well, it was.
So, so I would say, counselling, and I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but exercise was my biggest thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting if you do kind of more kind of research or reading around kind of antidepressants, if that makes sense, and in the main, SSRIs are generally used with are the main ones used, and actually what they do is they inhibit the reuptake of serotonin. So actually what happens with that is they kind of almost stabilize you and stop you from getting worse, but they don't necessarily give you the boost that people think that they give you the boost. You've got to do the exercise. You've got to find the ways to produce those, happy hormones, if that makes sense, to actually start to feel better. So that's why now things like mindfulness and exercise are massively encouraged to people that are suffering from depression. So, is there any advice that you could share with anyone who feels that they might need some help right now?
I would say that you're important enough, whether you believe it or not, to ask for help. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that I felt when I was at my lowest was that I wasn't important and that people would be better off without me. And I think when you get to that stage, you've got to realize that that's not reality. That's kind of helpful thought patterns. And on your best day, on your most rational day, if you asked anybody around you, that wouldn't be the reality. That's not how people feel about you. And I think for me as well, one of the biggest things that always got me through was, the feelings don't last. They feel awful in the moment. You can have a feeling that turns into a physical sensation, and it can be like a knot in your gut, or it can be, you're feeling sick, or just, perhaps you just literally can't move. But those feelings don't last. They pass, and you've just got to hang on until it passes. And when it's passed, that's when you really, you need to say to somebody, this is how I feel. And to not sugarcoat it for people, because people aren't mind readers. And I remember when I was feeling suicidal, and nobody wants to talk about the time that they were suicidal, but it's a reality for so many people. And if somebody isn't brave enough to have the conversation and say, I felt like that once, then, it makes it kind of not okay for other people to do it. But it was probably one of the hardest conversations I've ever had in my life, when I had to ring my friend and say, I feel like ending my life, and I've thought about how I'm going to do it. So it wasn't just an idle thought. It was, I've got a plan as well. And I knew myself that the only thing stopping me from taking the action was telling someone.
Yeah.
You know, it
Yeah.
kind of brings you back from the brink. So I
Yeah.
would say, if you feel like that, no matter how uncomfortable you
Yeah.
think it might make that person feel, have the conversation.
Yeah. It's really interesting, you know, in terms of what you say around that, because, you know, one of the key things that, you know, I try and get across in terms of, you know, the training that I do, it's like, no matter how someone might feel right now, that will change. It will always change. Mental health is dynamic. So those people that have never suffered in their life before, you know, like me, went through, you know, many years of, you know, I'd never suffered from depression. Yes, I'd had anxiety from being, you know, from childhood and teens, but that was my kind of, you know, that also was a driver for me as well, that whole part. So it was sometimes was debilitating, but other times was a driver. And but that whole, you know, it can affect anyone. It can creep up on you. And, you know, and you're right, it does change. And when you talk about your rational moments, the worrying thing that where people get to with that thought process around kind of going down that path towards those thoughts of suicide, it's often you become more and more isolated as time goes by, because you're in your mind, you think all your thoughts are completely rational. And, you know, it would be easier if, you know, they would be better off if all those thought processes. But actually isn't until you get that out of your mouth that you can start to really rationalize it, because the more isolated you become, the more irrational your thoughts are, and the most irrational thoughts are the most rational to you, aren't they? You know, it's like yeah, it's definitely not it's that's the hardest thing that we've got to deal with, I think, is just people being brave enough to just get those words out of their mouth to say, do you know what, I'm not okay. Really not okay.
Yeah, and, you know, it's a tough conversation to have, and, you know, and like you say, I think, you know, when I was at the very worst, you just want the pain to be over. And I think for me, I could see in that moment that all I would be doing is giving the pain to somebody else, like handing it to my kids.
Yeah.
I think, you know, not everybody's a parent, and sometimes that, you know, it's a lot worse than what I went through. But I think yeah, I think, you know, it's incredibly hard to talk about it, you know, and you can say, oh, you know, reach out and tell people, but, you know, in that moment, it just is, it's the hardest thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So why do you think days such as World Mental Health Day are so important?
Do you know what? I think they're important because of this, what we've been talking about, right? I think, you know, when someone says to you, I feel really low, or I feel really depressed, or, you know, I feel kind of desperate, and, you know, I'm thinking about hurting myself, that it can be really hard. Like, what do you do with that? You know, and you kind of want to just hurry over it, and, you know, oh, it'll be all right, you know, don't be silly, or, you know, because it can make you feel like that's painful. It's painful to hear it from someone, to hear the pain in someone's voice, to hear them say those words, you know, to what to do with that. And I think the more we have conversations, and the more we, you know, we talk to people about, you know, having conversations and saying these things out loud, and kind of, you know, the better equipped we are to help someone have that conversation. I think, you know, if you know that, you know, if someone reacts to you badly when you have that conversation, well, that's the end of the road, isn't it? If you've tried to have that conversation and you've come up with a I don't want to hear about this, then you're on your own, you know. And what I think what we need to help people do is, is give them the kind of the tools and the resilience to, if someone comes to you with that, to be able to go, take a breath, right? How can I help you? What do you need?
Yeah.
And acknowledge it and not kind of tidy it away.
Yeah. Accept it and look and start to think about where they can point people for help.
And just to let someone be heard. People aren't looking for you to fix their problems. They're not looking for you to offer them a solution. I think, for me, it would have been in that moment just somebody to say, God, that sounds really rough. And just listen. And that's because nobody could have fixed my problems. Nobody could have waved a magic wand, and I wouldn't have expected them to do. But I think we need to be seen and just to be heard.
Listen to, and just that encouragement that it can get better, it will get better.
And that that you're not kind of this weird person that I don't want around me because you've got mental health issues. And you think, Jesus Christ, it's 2020, we're still dealing with that.
Well, we are, aren't we? Definitely. And I mean, I had a conversation with some people last week, and we were talking about workplaces and what do you do, what would you do in a workplace if you around sort of first aid type for mental health. What would you do in a crisis? Would you know what to do? And it was just when we were talking about it, they just said, well, we had to deal with a crisis. We didn't necessarily know what to do. But then the company's solution was actually to make sure that at interview, they asked as many questions as possible and tried to avoid people with mental health issues. So we're in 2020, but ultimately we're we've got a lot of work to do. Definitely got a lot of work to do.
Oh, and I will say, in my last job before I went self-employed, I'd had 6 months off on with depression, and the lady who was in charge of HR, she rang me and she said, look, we want to offer you the job, but your previous employer has told us that you've been off for 6 months with mental health issues. She said, can you talk to me about that? And I said, it was a toxic work culture, the environment was awful, and my mental health took a battering, and that's why I'm leaving. And she was like, yeah, that's great, I just wanted to check, see what you had to say about it, and we'd like to sort out a start date.
Brilliant.
And I think, just have a conversation with someone,
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else you'd like to share today with anyone?
I think they've probably heard quite enough.
Well, it's been absolutely wonderful interviewing you, Claire.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for sharing your story.
You're welcome.